We are really tackling a difficult subject today, a vital one.
Absolutely.
We're going on a journey that our sources describe as harrowing, but, completely necessary.
Mm.
A deep dive into the global dog meat trade. We're going to be confronting the massive scale, the hidden criminal networks, and just the silent suffering that defines this industry, mostly across Asia.
That's right. And the sources we've pulled together for this they're intense. We have investigative reports. We have data from incredible organizations like Soy Dog, and some really detailed insights on the new documentary Dog War.
Okay.
So we know this is sensitive, but our mission here, for you, is to really synthesize all of this complex, emotionally charged information.
Right.
We need to get past that initial shock, to really understand the mechanics of it, the staggering numbers, the very serious public health risks that come from it, the organized crime that's fueling it all, and importantly, the powerful forces of change that are fighting back.
Exactly. So we've structured this deep dive to give you that full picture.
Yeah.
We're going to start with the overwhelming statistics to define the scale.
Yeah.
Then we'll have to move into the reality of the brutality involved.
It's tough, but necessary.
From there, we'll expose the illegal networks, the corruption that lets it all happen. And then we're going to spend a good amount of time on the hope.
Yes.
The shifting cultural views, the new laws, and the incredible activists on the ground.
Let's do it.
So let's not wait. Let's start with the sheer magnitude of this hidden industry. Okay, let's just jump right in with this enormous central statistic that kind of grounds everything else.
The big one.
Yeah. We are talking about an estimated 30 million dogs slaughtered every single year for human consumption across Asia.
30 million. It's a scale that is almost impossible for your mind to really process.
That really is. It doesn't
Yeah.
sound like, a small cultural practice. It sounds like an industrialized system of cruelty.
It is an industry, and that number immediately elevates the issue, right? It's not just isolated incidents here and there. It's systematic.
Right.
The reports we looked at show this scale is concentrated in a few key regions. They're both the major consumers and the supply hubs.
So where are we talking about primarily?
We're mainly looking at China, South Korea, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Those four are really the epicenter of consumption and, the infrastructure that supports it.
But it's not just limited to those four, is it? The trade's reach feels like it must be wider. This kind of crime doesn't just stop at a border.
Oh, far from it. The investigative data confirms that it's pervasive across the whole region.
Okay.
It's actively happening in the Philippines, in Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, even in very specific, often remote places like Nagaland in northern India.
Wow.
And this wide distribution is critical because it tells you how complex the supply chain is.
It means dogs have to be moved long distances.
Exactly, which, it inherently leads to more suffering, and it relies so heavily on those illicit cross-border smuggling operations we're going to unpack later.
So let's zero in on the sheer volume. In those biggest consumer nations, China stands out massively.
It does.
The reports say China is the single biggest consumer, slaughtering an estimated 10 to 20 million dogs every year.
That's up to 2/3 of the entire global estimate, just in one country.
It's just unbelievable.
And that scale just shows you how deeply entrenched the practice is there, both historically and economically.
And what about South Korea? The
Yeah.
numbers are lower, but the sources single it out for a reason.
Right. So South Korea is around 2 million dogs a year, but it has this unique structural component,
Which is,
intensive dog farming. It's a specific, well-established part of their supply chain. It's, regulated in a sense, but still incredibly
so
cruel.
it's more formalized there.
Exactly. That kind of structured farming is often less common in places like Vietnam or Indonesia, where the trade relies much more on opportunistic theft and catching dogs on the street.
That's a really important distinction, and I think that comparative context helps frame this globally.
It does.
Because the sources did mention, dogs are eaten elsewhere in some African countries like Ghana, Nigeria,
Right.
and even, which I found fascinating, in some remote Swiss villages by farmers for their own personal use. So why do the reports insist that the trade in Asia is fundamentally different?
It's that one word again. Scale.
Right.
In other parts of the world, it tends to be very small scale, localized, personal, subsistence-based even.
Okay.
But what we see across Asia is an organized industrial scale market. It involves massive commercial transport, dedicated slaughterhouses, and huge consumer demand that's often facilitated by, sophisticated organized crime.
So there's the commercial infrastructure.
That's what separates it. That 30 million figure is driven by a commercial, often illegal infrastructure. That's what makes it different from all other instances globally.
And the foundation of all of this massive scale, is an almost entirely unregulated industry.
Completely.
The reports are so clear about the sourcing methods. Dogs are just violently grabbed off the streets, stolen from people's homes, actual pets, or they're bred on these farms with just appalling zero welfare conditions.
And that lack of regulation is what dictates the cruelty from the absolute beginning.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if they're stolen or farmed. The animals are treated like disposable commodities, not livestock, that require even basic humane standards. They're acquired in the cheapest, quickest way possible.
Often breaking existing animal protection laws.
Every time. This unregulated sourcing means there's no official record, no vet oversight, and definitely no accountability for how they're treated. The entire supply chain is just built on a foundation of cruelty. 1.2, the beginning of the suffering. Transport and neglect.
So the suffering, it doesn't just start when they get to the slaughterhouse.
Right.
It begins the second they're captured.
The very second.
Let's really get into the details the sources give us about that initial journey, which can last for days, even weeks.
Yeah, the transport stage is just... It's a prolonged, agonizing experience. That's where the suffering is defined, long before their final moments.
Okay.
Investigative reports all stress that the intense cruelty begins during that long-distance transport. You have to move the animals from these remote capture points like rural villages or wherever they were stolen to the big, high-density urban centers where they're consumed.
So can you walk us through what that actually looks like, based on what groups like Soy Dog have documented?
The conditions are deliberately horrific. It's all about maximizing volume.
Of course.
Dogs are violently crammed into tiny wire cages, sometimes with dozens of other dogs. They're often stacked 2-3 tiers high on the back of a truck.
Oh, God.
And in some places, especially with the smuggling into Vietnam, they're tied up really tightly and just stuffed into sacks.
To keep them from fighting or escaping.
Right. And then they're forced to travel for days, literally days, without a single drop of water or any food, enduring intense heat or freezing cold or just drenching rain.
That kind of overcrowding and neglect, the total lack of sanitation, it has to lead to immediate and just severe physical problems.
Absolutely. The reports are crystal clear on this. The journey leads to immense psychological distress. The trauma, the noise.
And the physical injuries must be awful.
They're fighting, they're being crushed in the cages, or just the blunt force from the ride itself. And crucially, it leads to the rapid spread of infectious diseases.
Of course, they're all packed in together.
Parasites, filth, everything. So by the time they arrive, they're terrified, they're injured, they're starving, and they are highly, highly infectious.
So that initial suffering is just baked into the whole system.
It's systemic cruelty. It's part of the supply chain.
If you connect that back to the bigger picture, it really shows that the main economic priority here is just speed and volume. Not even the most basic standard of animal care. If they're just a commodity, their welfare during transit is just...
Yeah.
It's not a factor, it doesn't enter the cost equation.
It speaks to the brutal efficiency of the trade.
Yeah.
By completely eliminating humane standards, the criminal networks just maximize their profit. And critically, this is also the first point where the public health risk really begins.
How so?
All that stress and overcrowding, it just demolishes their immune systems.
Right.
And it exponentially amplifies disease transmission, which then poses this massive risk to the handlers, the traders, and ultimately to the people who eat the meat.
Okay, now we have to move to what is probably the most difficult part of this discussion. The actual methods of slaughter. The sources are just unflinching in detailing how these animals are killed, and we have to address the specifics. They really demonstrate the absolute lack of accountability and the true depth of the cruelty.
They're all designed for one thing, maximum speed and cost efficiency for the trader.
With a total disregard for animal welfare.
Complete disregard. Even though local laws often prohibit this kind of cruelty, these are methods of extreme and often very prolonged violence.
So let's detail the regional differences the reports found, starting with South Korea's more industrialized process.
Okay.
Tell us about the electrocution methods they use there, which the sources say are just excruciating.
Right. So in South Korea, where you have the dog farms, electrocution is a common practice. At the farms, at the slaughterhouses.
And how does it work?
The dogs are restrained, or they're just left in cages, and high-voltage wires are applied to their bodies. But the devastating detail the reports highlight is that this process is frequently botched.
Botched.
Or it's deliberately prolonged to save money on equipment or training.
So the death isn't quick.
Not at all. The resulting death is excruciating. Activists have documented it taking up to 5 minutes of conscious suffering.
5 minutes
Yeah.
of conscious agony. I mean,
Yeah.
that's impossible to reconcile with any standard of humane slaughter.
It is.
Why not use quicker methods? If death is the goal, why the prolonged suffering?
It's a failure on two fronts, financial and regulatory.
Okay.
The minimal investment you'd need for proper, effective stunning equipment, or even just the time it would take to ensure the animal is immediately unconscious. It's just seen as an unnecessary cost.
So the goal isn't just death, it's the cheapest death possible.
Exactly. The trader avoids the higher costs of humane practices, and the result is just unimaginable suffering so they can cut corners and maximize their profit margin.
Now, contrast that with the methods that are described for China and Vietnam. They seem to rely more on just blunt force trauma.
Yeah, the methods cited there often rely on sheer physical violence. Dogs are mercilessly beaten with heavy metal rods or clubs, or just slammed against hard surfaces until they die. It's brutal, blunt force trauma, and it often happens in full view of the other animals waiting.
Oh, God, which just maximizes the fear and terror in the holding pens.
Precisely. The reports describe the atmosphere in these places. They say it's thick with the smell of blood and just the sound of dogs screaming.
And it's not just beating and electrocution. The sources list other methods that are just beyond comprehension.
Hanging, strangulation, and the truly horrifying practice of throwing conscious, live dogs into vats of boiling water.
Why? What is the motivation for something like that?
It's often linked to traditional preparation methods. The belief is that the skin and hair have to be removed immediately right before butchering to get the meat ready quickly.
That level of suffering. It's just horrific. And you said earlier that a lot of these methods are actually illegal under existing laws in these countries.
Yes.
So we need to really dissect that gap, that enforcement gap.
That is the absolutely critical point here.
Right.
These nations may have laws against extreme cruelty, laws that mandate humane slaughter, but the unregulated nature of the dog meat market combined with endemic corruption and, political inertia, it means these brutal practices continue completely unchecked.
So the people doing this are never punished.
The investigative reports show that the people inflicting this pain are rarely, if ever, prosecuted.
So the law is on the books, but in practice, the trade operates with total impunity because of a failure to act.
It confirms it. The immense, unimaginable pain and fear these animals endure is essentially permitted by a failure of the state to enforce its own rules.
The system is prioritizing the profits of criminals over the law.
Yes. This failure to enforce is the central pillar that allows this industrial-scale cruelty and lawlessness to just thrive. 3.1, the illicit engine: theft, smuggling, and organized crime.
Okay, let's move from the individual acts of cruelty to the systemic organization of the whole trade. The sources make it so clear that this industry isn't just unethical, it's a major organized crime problem. It's fueled by theft and smuggling.
And it's so important to recognize that a number like 30 million dogs a year, that cannot be sustained by just, opportunistically catching strays.
No way.
It requires systematic, large-scale, organized criminal networks. And that connection to crime makes fighting the trade so much harder. You aren't just trying to change cultural habits.
You're trying to dismantle a lucrative, violent, and often protected criminal enterprise.
Exactly.
And this criminal element, it creates trauma that extends so deeply into the human community through pet theft.
Yes.
The reports really underscore that so many of these dogs, especially in high theft areas, they're not strays. They are stolen pets, snatched by these gangs right out of family yards or off the street.
The specific statistic from Bali, which comes up a lot in the sources, is just heart-wrenching.
What is it?
Around 70% of dogs in Bali's meat trade are estimated to be stolen pets.
70%. That's not just some casual crime. That's highly organized operations specifically targeting owned animals.
It is. And pet owners face this double trauma. You lose a beloved member of your family, and then you have the horror of knowing why. Knowing your companion was stolen for a brutal slaughter.
Can we talk a bit more about the methods they use? How do these gangs manage to steal pets so systematically over such wide areas?
The reports say the methods are often brazen and pretty sophisticated. They range from just simple snatching in rural areas to using poisons or tranquilizers in cities to subdue the dogs quickly and quietly.
So they're prepared.
Very prepared. The gangs often operate at night, using modified motorcycles or small trucks so they can collect them and get away fast. They'll have spotters who identify high-value dogs or accessible ones, or just any that are left unsupervised for a moment.
And then they're gone.
And once they're collected, they're moved very quickly into these centralized holding pens, far away from where they were taken, to break the trail and get them ready for that long-distance transport.
And once they have the animals, the sources detail these really complex logistics, these vicious cross-border smuggling operations.
This is where the criminal networks really show their sophistication and their complete disregard for the law.
Right.
They run these continuous, complex cross-border smuggling operations. They're designed to move thousands of stolen or sorted animals across these porous regional borders.
For example, from where to where?
From, say, Thailand or Laos into the high-demand markets in Vietnam or China. These are established, highly profitable supply lines. That's how you get to a 30 million dog figure.
That anecdote from 2011 about Soy Dog, when they fought the smuggling of 1,000 dogs from Thailand to Vietnam, that perfectly illustrates the scale of these movements.
It really does, and it connects the pet theft on a local level directly to this huge smuggling infrastructure.
These are not small-time operations.
No, they're running massive, well-financed supply lines. And to maintain that level of illegality, corruption is just. It's inevitable. It's institutionalized.
Yeah.
Activists, especially the ones working undercover, they report extensively that corrupt officials and local police often just let these crime groups work freely.
So how does that corruption actually manifest on the ground? Are we talking about just turning a blind eye, or is it more direct?
It's both, and it's widespread. In some cases, it's direct, regular payoffs, bribes to police, or at checkpoints to make sure the trucks loaded with stolen dogs get through without any problems.
Often disguised as legitimate livestock transport.
Exactly. In other cases, it's just political inertia or a deliberate failure to enforce existing laws because there are financial incentives higher up the chain.
So if a raid is planned,
Corrupt officials might tip off the vendors. Essentially, the criminal networks maintain control of this whole illicit supply chain by just neutralizing law enforcement through payoffs and political influence. It makes the trade incredibly resilient. 3.2, the risk to human health.
Okay, now let's pivot sharply to the human cost of this.
Yeah.
It often gets less attention than the animal cruelty,
Right.
but it's just as critical.
It is.
The serious systemic public health consequences.
Mhm.
This is a massive zoonotic risk.
That's the critical angle for governments. The health risks are direct and they are severe. And it's all because of the sourcing, the overcrowding, and the unsanitary conditions we've been talking about.
Right.
The dogs in this trade are stressed, their immune systems are compromised, and they are frequently infected with serious zoonotic illnesses.
Diseases that can jump from animals to humans.
Exactly.
What are the specific diseases that international health organizations point to?
The reports flag several major threats: rabies, cholera, and various serious parasites.
Rabies is obviously a huge one.
Rabies is arguably the most urgent concern. Dogs that are stolen from the street or moved across these huge distances without any vet checks, they're highly likely to be carrying the virus.
And cholera.
The unsanitary conditions just guarantee the spread of bacteria like Vibrio cholerae, which causes cholera.
And the way these diseases get to humans is, it's direct and it's terrifying. The process of slaughter and consumption.
Precisely. When an animal is slaughtered, often in filthy, unregulated places, using these brutal, high-contact methods, the butchers, the handlers, the whole surrounding community are directly exposed to the blood, the fluids, the nervous tissue of infected animals.
It's a perfect storm for rabies transmission.
A perfect high-risk environment. And then, eating undercooked or infected meat carries the very distinct risk of transmitting cholera or parasites to the person who buys it.
This threat is so severe that it's gotten the official attention of global bodies, right? What did the World Health Organization warn about?
The WHO has issued very clear, specific warnings about the public health hazards linked to the dog meat trade.
What do they focus on?
They specifically highlighted its central role in the persistence and the geographic spread of rabies across Asia. They've urged nations to enforce stricter regulations, explicitly calling out the unregulated criminal movement of dogs as a major and preventable vector for disease transmission to humans.
So for governments then, tackling the dog meat trade becomes a compulsory security measure.
It has to be.
It's an economic problem, a moral one, and a public safety imperative all wrapped up together. The potential for a localized rabies outbreak, accelerated by these criminal smuggling routes, that's a massive risk for any government.
It adds significant political pressure. If a government fails to control the illegal trade, they are effectively allowing criminal networks to undermine national public health efforts. They're guaranteeing that diseases like rabies, which is 100% fatal once symptoms show up, will continue to circulate and tragically claim human lives.
It's a health crisis manufactured by greed and lawlessness. Okay, despite the overwhelming scale and the deep roots of organized crime we've just laid out, the sources are also definitive that change is happening.
Yes, absolutely.
And the most powerful catalyst seems to be this profound shift in public opinion, especially among younger, more globally aware generations across Asia.
This shift is so critical because it removes the cultural license for the trade. And we have specific, quantifiable data on this.
Okay.
The opinion polls in South Korea, for example, show a massive figure. 70% of the public now refuse to eat dog meat.
70%. That is not just marginal opposition. That is an overwhelming demographic rejection of the practice.
It is.
And yet, you still hear the trade defended by those who profit from it as a cultural practice or a long-standing tradition. How is that argument holding up?
It's failing rapidly, primarily on ethical grounds.
Right.
The source material notes that these younger generations are increasingly and, successfully challenging the idea that tradition can justify immense systemic animal cruelty. They argue that cultures evolve. Brutal practices have to be abandoned when our moral understanding advances.
This leads us right to that profound ethical conflict the sources raise, the whole question of moral status. The sources point out the inconsistency. We cherish dogs as pets globally, yet other animals like pigs and chickens, which have similar cognitive abilities, are widely consumed.
This is where we have to engage with that cognitive dissonance. The debate asks us, why do we give the dog, man's best friend, this uniquely protected moral status, while we assign pigs, which we know are highly intelligent, social, emotionally complex animals, a commoditized status?
So the question isn't just about eating meat versus not eating meat.
Not solely. It's about the inconsistency in our global ethical framework.
So the core of the debate is really focused on the degree of cruelty in the dog meat trade, the barbaric, illegal killing methods, rather than just the consumption itself. The difference is the treatment that's guaranteed by the lack of regulation.
Exactly. If we acknowledge the sentience of a dog, then these methods, prolonged electrocution, beating, are morally repugnant, regardless of any historical context.
Yeah.
The moral status argument acts as an accelerator for the movement. If the treatment is inhumane and illegal, then the practice has to stop. And this conflict is forcing animal welfare to take precedence over claims of tradition.
So if 70% of South Koreans refuse to eat dog meat, what are the roadblocks? What's preventing the government from just implementing a full, immediate ban? Why is there a delay?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? The sources outline some pretty significant resistance.
Okay.
There are two primary barriers. First is economic lobbying and compensation.
The people who make money from it.
The existing farmers and vendors, the organized economic interest, they fight vigorously against any ban, arguing the government has to compensate them for shutting down their businesses.
Which would be a huge logistical and financial challenge for the government.
Massive. Buying the land, compensating the workers, relocating all the remaining dogs. And the second barrier is just political inertia.
Meaning?
Even though most of the public opposes it, governments are hesitant to undertake such a disruptive, expensive, and politically charged compensation program overnight. It's a complex balancing act between satisfying the majority's moral stance and managing the economic fallout for the minority who are still involved. 4.2 governments and official responses.
But despite those roadblocks, government action is clearly happening.
It is.
That shift in public opinion is translating into concrete legislative and enforcement steps. Let's detail some of those actions.
South Korea, given its high opposition rate, is really leading with direct enforcement. They've established a specialized task force.
And what's their job?
Their specific mandate is to crack down on illegal dog farms and slaughterhouses. It signals a serious, proactive approach that goes beyond just, surface-level regulation.
And the sources noted critical action from China, the world's biggest consumer, which is hugely significant.
Yes. Major regional action has happened. The city of Shenzhen banned the consumption of dog and cat meat back in 2020.
That feels like a massive legislative move in the world's largest market.
It was profoundly significant. And furthermore, the Chinese central government has signaled that a nationwide ban might be possible in the future, especially building on the increased awareness after recent zoonotic disease outbreaks.
And what about Indonesia, a major region for smuggling and theft?
Indonesia has pledged to actively eradicate the dog meat trade nationwide. And Bali, which is a known hotspot and the site of that devastating pet theft statistic, has seen tangible, proactive raids on dog meat restaurants and markets.
So these government actions, the task forces, the city bans, the national pledges, the raids, they show a pattern, right? An acknowledgement that the status quo is just not sustainable, politically, ethically, or socially.
It creates a powerful cascade effect. Once a major consumer nation takes concrete legislative action, it puts immense pressure on neighboring countries that might be part of that criminal supply chain to follow suit. The sources confirm this pattern of a regional legal response that mirrors the regional crime networks. 4.3. The critical role of activists and international organizations.
Of course, none of this legislative progress happens in a vacuum.
Not at all.
The sources really underscore the absolutely vital, tireless, and often life-threatening role that's played by international welfare organizations and local activists in driving all this change.
These groups are the engines of change. They're often operating in places where law enforcement has just failed, and we have to name the key organizations that are cited in the reports. The Soy Dog Foundation and the Animal Kingdom Foundation. They operate on multiple fronts at the same time, from emergency interventions to high-level political lobbying.
So walk us through the specifics of their work on the ground.
Their work starts with immediate direct action, rescuing dogs directly from slaughterhouses or literally intercepting transport trucks on the road.
And then what happens?
After the rescue, they provide extensive, specialized medical care and psychological rehabilitation for these traumatized survivors. They're often dealing with chronic illness, starvation, extreme injuries.
And then they find them homes.
They work tirelessly to find them loving, permanent homes all over the world.
But it's not just rescue, right?
Right.
They also provide the crucial intelligence that's needed for government action and media exposure.
Exactly. They are the investigative arm of this movement. They conduct highly risky undercover investigations to expose the cruelty. They gather hard evidence, often on film, that can be used in legal challenges and for public advocacy.
And that evidence is what forces reluctant governments to act.
It's crucial for that. And they also lobby governments directly, pushing for stricter laws and critically demanding that the existing laws are actually enforced.
And that specific anecdote about Soy Dog in 2011 perfectly illustrates their commitment, their risk-taking against organized crime.
It's such a powerful story of dedication and direct action. In 2011, a team from Soy Dog successfully fought, really fought, against the smuggling of 1,000 dogs from Thailand to Vietnam.
Wow.
It involved intercepting a complex criminal operation, navigating corrupt officials, and physically intervening to save the animals. It just shows their willingness to take high-stakes, direct action, literally risking their own safety to save these dogs.
So they're essentially providing the intelligence, the infrastructure, and the constant political pressure that governments are only now, slowly, beginning to institutionalize themselves.
That's a very accurate assessment.
They're filling the massive vacuum left by law enforcement.
They are. They're forcing the issue into the political spotlight where it just can't be ignored anymore, often putting themselves directly in the path of violent criminal gangs to get it done.
Okay, let's transition now from that systemic fight to the individual impact. Because these individual stories of survival, they are so essential for inspiring global awareness
They are.
and reminding us that change really does happen one rescued life at a time.
The reports give us a really powerful, specific example. The story of a dog named Fajir.
Tell us about Fajir.
Fajir was a dog who was rescued from a slaughterhouse in Indonesia by the Soy Dog team. They were working in collaboration with the journalist John Keeble. Fajir's story is it's a triumph against these absolutely brutal circumstances.
And pairing that rescue with immediate media documentation is such a key advocacy tool. It turns private suffering into public knowledge.
It's advocacy amplified. Fajir's rescue was filmed. It was featured in an investigative documentary, which then helped spread global awareness far beyond the initial activist community.
It puts a face to the numbers.
Exactly. These individual stories humanize the scale of the crisis. They turn that staggering 30 million dog statistic into a single, relatable face of survival.
And these survivors, they also become these powerful ambassadors for the cause. They show the world the potential for recovery, even after unimaginable trauma. They represent the ultimate goal.
Their survival stories are vital for the fundraising and recruitment efforts of organizations like Soy Dog. They provide the hope that's needed to keep activists motivated when they're facing such immense cruelty and these deeply entrenched criminal operations. These individual victories just fuel the larger movement towards systemic change. 5.2, the documentary Dog War.
And speaking of the media spotlight and innovative advocacy, the sources dedicate a lot of attention to this new documentary, Dog War. It had its world premiere recently on Sunday, June 23rd, 2024, at the Raindance Film Festival in London. And this film takes a very unique strategic approach to documenting the fight.
It really does. What makes Dog War so fascinating is its focus on the team doing the rescuing. It's a group of war-hardened, canine-loving combat veterans. These are men and women who have transitioned their military skills and experience to fight the trade, specifically in South Korea.
And the sources describe their methods as being like military-style tactics, covertly and overtly infiltrating hidden farms and markets to rescue dogs.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on what a covert military-style tactic even looks like in the context of animal rescue?
It suggests meticulous planning, surveillance, structured execution. Instead of just traditional visible protesting, these veterans are using skills like intelligence gathering, nighttime reconnaissance, structured team movement.
Secure extraction procedures.
Exactly, operational security, all to maximize the number of dogs they can save while minimizing the risk to themselves. They're applying professional, organized methods to challenge these disorganized but often armed and violent criminal vendors.
The film was a staff pick for Offbeat Docs,
Right.
which confirms that unique approach.
And its emotional intensity.
The director, Andrew Abrahams, seems very deliberate in his approach. The sources quote him saying his films often focus on hidden stories of suffering and places where boundaries or assumptions collide. How did he apply that philosophy to Dog War?
His intent gives us some really essential context for watching it. Abrahams emphasized that even though the film deals with disturbing subject matter, he explicitly avoided showing the brutalization of dogs or excessively gory footage.
Which is a very conscious choice.
A very conscious narrative choice. It was made specifically to prevent turning off viewers who might otherwise just disengage because it's too traumatic. He wanted to ensure they stayed engaged with the core ethical and social conflict.
That's a sophisticated way to tell the story, focusing on the humanity of the rescuers and the conflict itself, rather than just relying on shock value.
Precisely. His goal was to provide a comprehensive 360-degree view. The film doesn't just feature activists. It has extensive interviews with politicians, with the farmers, with the vendors.
So it's not a simple good versus evil story.
Not at all. It treats the situation as a deep, painful social conflict that's tearing communities apart.
And that comprehensive perspective allows the film to raise these really universal, profound questions. The director frames the central conflicts as animal rights versus human livelihood, but also, crucially, that tricky ethical line between heroism and vigilantism. Let's really dissect that last point.
That tension, heroism versus vigilantism, that's the philosophical core of the documentary.
Yeah.
These veterans are taking the law into their own hands to right a massive wrong. They're often deliberately bypassing or exposing failed government processes. So the film asks you, the viewer, when the state fails to uphold its own laws and protect its animals, does direct, possibly illegal action by private citizens become ethically justified?
Is it heroism when they save thousands of dogs?
Or does it cross a line into vigilantism when they challenge the authority of the state and the local economy?
It really positions South Korea, this modern, highly developed nation, as a country that's fundamentally at war with itself over these deeply held moral beliefs.
It does. The film uses the dog meat trade as a lens to examine societal responsibility and the nature of ethical intervention on a global stage.
It's a powerful examination of how social change gets accelerated.
It suggests that while political action is slow, the immediate, risky heroism of these activists and veterans is forcing the pace of that political action. It's making the trade one of the most visible cultural and ethical battlegrounds in the world today.
So, for you, the listener, understanding the scale, the crime, and the complexity of this fight is step one. But the source material also gives us clear, actionable knowledge. Ending the dog meat trade requires a collective effort, and everyone can contribute. Let's detail the 4 key areas for action.
Okay, step 1. Educate and advocate. This is the foundation. This is the bedrock for systemic change. You have to commit to learning more about the trade, going beyond the emotional stories to really understand the logistics and the political failures.
And then share that knowledge.
Then you need to share those verifiable facts rigorously on social media and within your own community.
And advocacy means engaging with the political process, not just sharing headlines.
Absolutely. Crucially, write detailed emails or letters to your local leaders, your national representatives. Urge them to support legislation that bans or severely restricts the trade. And most importantly, demand that they enforce the existing laws against corruption, smuggling, and cruelty. Knowledge is only powerful when it becomes sustained, directed pressure.
Okay, step 2. Vote with your wallet. Be a smart buyer. This is how you apply direct economic pressure on those criminal networks we talked about.
Your purchasing power sends an undeniable signal. You have to actively avoid any businesses or products that are directly or indirectly involved in the dog meat trade or any of its associated industries.
And
Instead, choose products that are certified cruelty-free. By deliberately patronizing ethical businesses and suppliers, you send a clear, measurable economic message that cruelty is financially toxic and will not be tolerated.
So it's not just about boycotting. It's about actively rewarding ethical and transparent business practices.
Precisely. It's a mechanism to shift the entire market away from these illegal, cruel suppliers toward regulated, humane industries. It forces the trade to lose its financial viability.
Step 3. Support the organizations on the ground. The groups we've mentioned, Soy Dog Foundation, Animals Asia, they are the ones doing the highly risky, expensive work of rescue, medical care, and political investigation.
And these groups rely entirely on public support to match the scale of the trade. You can contribute in a few ways. You can donate funds to cover the high costs of rescue, medical rehab, cross-border operations.
Or your time.
You can volunteer your specific skills or professional expertise, or you can simply spread awareness about their current campaigns and what their immediate needs are. These organizations need sustained financial help to counter the scale and the resilience of the criminal trade they're up against.
And finally, step 4. Keep the pressure on. The job isn't done when a law gets passed. We've seen that existing laws are often ignored because of corruption and political complacency.
Sustained political pressure is necessary for enforcement. We have to collectively push governments to enforce the existing laws against the illegal parts of the trade, like smuggling and theft, which we know are often ignored. Demand stronger actions. Sign petitions, join peaceful public protests, and make sure that political leaders can't just quietly ignore the problem once the media spotlight fades. 6.2, final thought on individual impact.
We've navigated a really difficult journey today. We've contrasted the overwhelming scale of suffering 30 million dogs a year, fueled by organized crime and barbaric methods, with these tangible signs of hope.
We have.
The shifting public opinion, the legislative action, the dedicated activism of groups like Soy Dog and the Veterans in Dog War.
And if we connect this all back to that bigger ethical picture the source material raises, the trade really challenges the very structure of our global morality. It forces us to look beyond national traditions and confront the profound inconsistencies in how we assign moral status to different species across the globe.
Why does the world tolerate the intense, industrialized suffering of 30 million dogs when the identical suffering of a species that we universally categorize as a pet or protected would cause immediate catastrophic global outrage? That is the crucial ethical question this deep dive leaves you with to continue exploring.
It asks us to examine the arbitrary lines we draw between pet and commodity, and whether those lines are based on emotion, science, or just cultural tradition. The fight to end the dog meat trade is fundamentally a test of our global moral consistency.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Learn more, advocate for change, and keep pushing for a more humane future. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.